Hello, Sam. You found the room after all that fighting.
Hello.
Right, we shall kick off, everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Amy. I host these showcases, and it's so great today to have the one and the only Mr. Sam Noble with us today, from the app and office team. You're an app engineer, is that correct, Sam?
Yep, that's correct.
Fantastic. I am so excited that you're here today to share with us what's involved in the app release revolved around our co-op app. Today's session, you may know it's titled From Feature Request to Release. Super exciting. And before we kick off, I'll just go through some general housekeeping, as you're all probably aware today. So do get engaged, drop the messages in the chat. Send us your questions. We've got a Q&A feature at the top that you can use there, or you can drop them in the chat and mark them with a Q at the end. I've been told that we have some surefire experts in the room that are ready and waiting to answer some of your questions as we go on. We'll pause throughout today. If you do have any questions, then please do. If you're a keen bean, please do come forward and ask those questions or drop them in the chat. We'll answer them as we go. But we do have an expert team that's kind of on hand to answer your curious questions as we go on throughout today. If you want to hold them to the end, you have that option as well. But I am super excited for today. So without further ado, I will stop my blabbing and hand it over to our wonderful guest, Sam, today. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks, Amy. Let me just share my tab. Hope I've got the right one. Is that it? Cool. Would have if I started at the beginning rather than at the end.
I feel like there's like a wise story or like wise sage tale to say around that, around starting at the end and the beginning.
Cool. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Cool. So yeah, as mentioned, this will be about the app and our process from when you give us something to work on to it actually being live in the app for everyone. So to start off, I want you to cast your minds. You're currently sat at home, you're on your phone, you're scrolling through, I don't know, Facebook, Netflix, whatever you want to do. And then you decide to go to the App Store, see if there's any new updates going. And when you do, lo and behold, Co-op has an update. Yay, our favorite app. So you install it, and you find a new shiny wallet tab. This was the biggest bit of feature work that we've done in a while, and it is also the most noticeable. Meanwhile, at Padme headquarters, we're taking a post-release break, only to start up again in like the next 5 minutes. Aw, bless them. So the question is, how do we get here? Well, it doesn't come out of magic. There's a whole lot of effort behind the scenes, and it kind of looks like this. So we've got 3 main components. So there's the technical discovery, there's the development, and then there's a release. And you'll notice that there's quite a bit of overlap with each section, and I'll kind of talk about that as we go along. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to talk about everything in context of Wallet, just so that we have kind of an understanding around that effort, and then you kind of can visually like see it in your head how that all plays out. So just a little bit of housekeeping. So as Amy said, there will be bits in between where you can ask questions, and that will be at the end of each of these 3 major sections that we're covering, as well as right at the end. So if you could keep hold of your questions till then, that'd be great. If not, there's also the Q&A section, and hopefully someone will be keeping an eye on that and answering any questions if they can. So first section, technical discovery. So we have a bit of a timeline. this kind of demonstrates like worst case scenario as well as best case. Well, worst case is probably not the right term, but like longer, bigger bits of feature work that require a lot more effort than, let's say, changing a bit of text in the wallet screen somewhere, like changing the title. So we start off with signed off designs and specifications. That helps us to know what exactly we're going, well, helps us set what we would say is done. We then create an epic to encapsulate all this work as one big ticket. Then we break out into the initial technical discussions, depending on the size and complexity of what we're being asked to do. That could take hours, that could take weeks. So in terms of wallet, it was quite a bit. I think there was a few weeks of effort involved. Writing tickets, so we break down the big epic ticket into smaller tickets that allow us to work together as a team whilst delivering this quite quickly. After that, there is the refine and estimation session, where we carefully think about what each ticket is asking us to do. Then we organize that into sprint buckets, and I'll talk about what a sprint bucket is when we get to that section. Then we go into the planning bit, and then we actually start the work. So first off, initial technical discussions. So this helps us to understand exactly what it is we're going to be doing. So in terms of wallets, it's like, right, okay, this is a new screen. It is replacing the card tab. It's going to have these features. So we're going to have the card back on there, as well as the rewards balance. How are we going to do that? How are we going to load that? All these things kind of get discussed in the early stages so that we can identify any blockers before we start working on them, as well as get a kind of an estimation as to how long it's going to take. Of course, this estimation is only an estimation. Things will always come out in development that will either say increase the time or decrease, depending on what it is we find. So this helps us to understand the who, the what, the why, and you can see a couple of examples of questions that we do ask there. So the next part is to write the tickets. So the idea is that we break down this whole complex wallet tab into small incremental bits that help us track the progress a lot easier. So for wallets, that actually came out as 126 tickets. That includes both Android and iOS developments, so it's roughly about half that per platform. Sometimes one platform requires more based on the complexity of how those platforms behave. The tickets also serve to ensure that there's no ambiguity between developers. Essentially, what we want is for any developer in the team to pick up this ticket and know exactly what it is we're expected to be creating. And that should not change depending on who's picked that up. And that is done through the clear set of acceptance criteria, which is agreed by the team, but is usually based off of the requirements that we're given at the beginning of this feature request. Sometimes we have to go back and discuss with the wider team if we aren't sure, or if the requirements that we've given have a bit of a hole in them that we kind of want to iron out. So after that, we take those tickets and we review them. So just because we've written the tickets doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't all up to speed. So the refine and estimation process allows us to be very nitty-gritty and also make sure that everyone on the team is aware of what is this ticket, well, each ticket is asking us to do that for. We do have the benefit of them being fairly similar on both platforms, so we don't necessarily have to do it all the time, just where it applies to both platforms. Again, the idea is that we want to keep the effort of each ticket quite low so that they move quickly, so we can track the progress. What we don't want is tickets that are extremely high dev effort and they get blocked halfway through development, and we can't catch that until the very end. So that's the purpose of them breaking down smaller. We can track those things moving. If something stops for too long, then we can start asking questions as to, is there anything we can do to unblock it? Have we accidentally committed to something that we're not ready for? And as it says there, we break down the tickets further if the level is too high or too uncomfortable to not get that tracking done. And again, if there is any ambiguities that we can't resolve internally, we then take it to a wider team to say, look, we tried to refine it. We're not sure exactly what it is out of the requirements that this particular thing's going to work. So once we've done that, we go into sprint planning. So the way we work is in 2-week sprints. That's a Scrum term. It means that we take a bunch of tickets and we say, this is what we're going to do within those 2 weeks. Now, the sprint can change. There might be other parts of the business that require us to do something. So, for example, copy changes, or there's a big issue that is being reported and we need to investigate that. So sometimes the plan doesn't go according to the way we expect, but we try and organize the tickets that we have into these 2-week sprints and then do some readjustments should anything else come up. So we do that in priority order. So sometimes in order to work on certain things, other tickets have to be done first. When we're organizing, we also have to consider other requirements. So just because we're working on Wallet and that's our primary bit of work, doesn't mean that it's the only bit of work that we're working on. For example, there can be like some sign-in issues that I know is a problem at the moment, and so we kind of incorporate some time dedicated to ironing out issues that we're aware of. So yeah, that is the planning stage, and then we kick off. So here's a stage in which we can actually ask questions. So if anyone has any questions, now is the time to do so. And also here's a timeline just to reiterate that. Are there any questions, Amy, Nick?
There's a couple in the chat.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go on, Nick. Go on, Nick. You go for it.
There's a couple in the chat. I know Matt's replying to Peter's, which is, how soon does testing begin for the next major versions of Android and iOS? Not the versions, but the big number ones.
We are. I'll save that question because that comes up in the next section.
Awesome.
And hopefully that will answer the question. But if not, then we'll go back and answer that question. Is there another one?
Yeah. They're rolling in, Sam. You're like absolutely crushing it. So for your small manageable task tickets, do we have any time frames around these? Like, are they between a certain number of hours or days?
So we don't typically time box tickets. We just say it in like in perspective of like effort, and the reason is because if we start committing to time, then when something comes up and it's actually more effort than required, then we're falling behind. Whereas if we say that it's a certain level of effort, But if I was to give an answer, we try and typically keep them small enough so that they move within a day. That's for the majority of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. That's
Some of
good.
them are more complex and therefore take more time, but we do try and split them out small enough that they get done within a day where possible.
Awesome. Okay. What techniques and best practices do you use in your sprint planning meetings to make sure that you're having an open and honest conversation about the challenges you foresee?
So each sprint has a goal, which we say that is what we have to commit to. That's a really tough question, but it's a good one. So we always like make sure, is there anything that is a major issue or is something that we need to address? We always make sure that that is discussed before we even set a goal, because if there's something that is a bigger priority that isn't what we're working on, so for example, sign-in issues, that's the only one I can think of. It's a big issue, still not able to figure that one out, but it's a wider team. It's not just the mobile teams in that case, but we do dedicate some of that time, but we also have to say, look, we need to bring out Wallet. So what tickets of Wallet can we bring in that allows us to both look at sign-in issues as well as continue that development? And also we do discuss like whether or not we've got every ticket that meets that goal. So we wouldn't necessarily start any work on components in the wallet if we didn't already have the wallet screen. So it's things like that. And the way the team collaborates, it's quite open. Everyone's got an opinion and they're of all equal weight. So if someone's got a concern, we do foster that environment where people can say, I'm not comfortable about this, and we can then discuss, and hopefully we all end up getting comfortable with the idea of what we're committing to, or we're all in agreement that what we're committing to isn't necessarily what we're ready for.
Yeah, that's
Hoping
brilliant.
that's the question.
It was broad enough but specific enough that it answered the question. Yeah, there's a few more coming through, but in the interest of time, we'll go to the chat, and between the team and Matt, we'll answer the rest of them in there. Take a breath, have a sip of water, and continue, Sam. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so I'm hoping that I've shown you that timeline and you're quite familiar with what that section covers. So we'll move on to the next section, which is the development stage. I've put in there per ticket because most of what comes in this timeline will be done for each ticket, and I'll signpost when there's things that we can do to like reduce the repetition. So I want you to imagine that what we cover here, for Wallet, it was 126 times. So everything that we cover done 126 times throughout the entire development. So we start with the ticket being assigned. So a developer takes responsibility. They work on the development work. That involves a bit of unit testing, some development testing. Then we go into what's called the pull request stage, and I'll explain what that is because that's another dev term that I'm aware that not a lot of technical people would understand what that means. That involves a bit of a code review. Then we add that into the app. There is a nightly build. We write the test cases. Then we test them against the user stories. Then there's some acceptance testing, some regression testing, and then we can say the ticket is complete or done. So hopefully they all make sense in a second. So the first thing, ticket is being assigned. So most of the time it's first come, first served when tickets are given. But sometimes tickets will be assigned based on developers' knowledge and as well as their familiarity with the code base that is involved. As part of the assignment, the developer will check that everything is ready before this ticket can be picked up. Otherwise, they will pick up a different ticket that isn't blocked by dependencies. It's also good for the developer to refresh themselves of what the ticket is actually asking for. What we don't want is someone to think they know what the ticket is talking about and then build something completely different. Again, this is why we refine the tickets so that everyone gets the same, produces the same output. So, development work. So, sometimes it takes an hour, sometimes it takes 5 days. That 5 days is like the worst case scenario where something has horrendously popped out of the woodworks that we didn't expect to happen. Very rare that happens, but I thought I'd be worth mentioning that. And of course, that development time takes longer depending on how complicated that work actually is. This time also includes the investigation. So is there a bit of technology that we aren't familiar with or just need a little refresher? Actually writing the code, so getting it to actually work. And then unit testing, which is used for ensuring that when we do some business logic, that when we make changes, that everyone's aware that if we change something and it has a knock-on effect, we get a report saying, hey, you've changed this thing, was that intentional? So this is like a quality assurance to the unit testing, and that is done specifically by developers. So pull request. So whenever we pick up a ticket, what we do is we take what's known as the development branch of the app. So this isn't the working version. This is just where all the changes that we've made are stored. What we do is we take a snapshot of that and create our own mini version of it. We write the code that that fulfills the ticket requirements, and then what we need to do is we need to request for that to go back into the main branch. You cannot code directly onto the main branch because we've set permissions up, so you can't do that. And the pull request process is quite important for the development team. It does quite a few quality checks, and without that, anyone could go and cause chaos within the app, and we wouldn't know about it. So, as part of the pull request, what we do is we take that little branch that we've done ticket work on, and it builds it. This ensures that that the app still runs when you actually put the code back in, and that requires 30 minutes to an hour to build. It checks the unit tests, so I mentioned before. So we have about, let's say, 1,000 tests on each platform that make sure that each bit of the app does what we expect it to do. If one of them doesn't pass, then the pull request stops, and the developer has to go back and review those changes and ensure that that test is passing, whether that's changing the test because the logic has changed itself or fixing the code that caused the change so the test passes again. Depends on what the report is actually on. Screenshot tests. So this is a new one, and this is incredibly powerful because it is pixel, what's the word? Stringent. So if something's a pixel out, it will report that change has been made, and you've got to review that. Code quality checks. So we scan through the code and make sure that we're producing high quality code. and making sure we're not making any unnecessary lines of code. So if things are unused, it will tell us that that thing is unused. And I think the most important bit is the peer review. So before you can even add your code into the main branch, it must be reviewed by another developer, and they've got to say, yes, this is what we want. And that's quite useful for learning as well, because sometimes the developer will say, hey, this can be done a better way, or I'm not sure about using this bit of technology as it's been known to cause problems. And that takes quite a while, just because the developer themselves has their own tasks to work on. So they've kind of got to find a nice balancing act between doing their own work and reviewing someone else's, as well as being extra careful about going through that and spotting any issues that may occur. So once that has been added, let's say the developer has approved it and all these checks have passed, what they do is they sit on the development branch or the main branch, and every night we create a build. And what that does is that does exactly what we said about the building it on a separate machine. And this creates a candidate for the quality assurance to actually test. If anyone's been actively involved in testing off of the live app, they'll have been invited to App Center and Test Flight. So the nightly build actually sends a version of the main branch to each of these every night. And I've also put in there that this can be forced earlier if necessary. So let's say we've had a really productive day and we've got 10 tickets over since the last nightly build. Rather than wait for the nightly build to kick off at 9 p.m, it might be more efficient for us to kick off an early nightly build to get those 10 over to QA, and then let the nightly build kick off again for any other work that gets added after that point. So the nightly build's kicked off. They've managed to get a test candidate. So QA then goes and writes test cases, outlines what they'll be testing, how they're going to test it, as well as test the ticket acceptance criteria. So again, that set of standards that we expect the ticket to fulfill. Once they've done that, then we start to do the regression tests, and that just checks every aspect of the app to ensure that we haven't had a knock-on effect that hasn't been caught by any of the other tests. And again, if anything goes wrong, the QA will raise a bug, and that will be taken back to the developer, as that is not a fulfilled ticket. But most cases, they'll be quite happy. They'll pass it on. So once it's passed on, it goes through acceptance testing. So our product owner goes through the ticket and makes sure that it is what we agreed it was going to be. And then finally, as part of our process, we give the designers an opportunity to have a once over at the work and inspect that and tell us if it meets the criteria and their expectations. And if not, what we do is we create another ticket, and then we start the process again. So we go through those initial discussions, and that's that overlap that I was talking about. So I'll take another pause. I believe I've been ranting for a while. Yeah, so this is an opportunity. I'm hoping that answered the earlier question about testing, but if not, please remind me of it.
I'm absolutely loving the engagement you're getting here, Sam, from the questions in the chat. It's really, really good. Couple that I can't answer. So Paul has asked, what tools do you use throughout the development testing process to ensure the app works across different devices and operating systems?
Good question. I'm not 100% clued up on the whole details, but I can tell you for
Okay,
a unit test. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say we can take it away and then come back with an answer, and then we can rattle through some more. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll capture that.
I'll give what I can tell you. So the unit tests are all dev written, so that's basically more code. As for testing on different devices, I cannot remember the name of it, which is really unfortunate. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Browser Stack?
That's the one. That's the one. Browser Stack. So Browser Stack allows us to test the same bit of functionality across both Android and iOS platforms, and also test that on various versions. What's the word? Simultaneously? Yeah. I'm hoping that answers the question. And then with the regression test, it will be just a bit of a set rules, try this, try that. And I think all the test cases are written in TestRail. Correct me if anyone knows the actual tool. I'm hoping that answers the question.
Yeah, so basically when it comes to testing, I do try and cover a range of devices from one of the oldest versions. So currently I'm using from Android 10 onwards, and iOS we go far back as iOS 11, iOS 12. And this all depends on the statistics that we get from, we use a website called Stats Counter, which tells you how many percentage of users are using each OS version. So if it drops below 5% or goes below 3%, we then start to kind of move away from that OS version and go towards the more latest versions that are coming into the market. That's what we use. So we try and keep up with the market and look at the trends on how many people are using each OS version, and then respond based on that for our testing effort. In terms of regression, we do write all the test cases for the acceptance tickets, as well as for the regression was in TestRail, which is then records all the information about which was how many passed, how many failed, or how many bugs were raised. So all the information recorded in there and is then shared with the test manager, the PO, the product owners, and the project manager, so they're all aware of how each sprint has progressed.
Awesome.
Thanks, Amace. Yeah, and in addition to that, we also use a tool called ScreenshotBot for our screenshot tests, which is also very detailed. It goes through everything that we say we want to test as a screenshot and gives us a exact, well, it will only flag up when things are even a pixel out. So that's quite a nifty tool. And for the code quality that I mentioned, that scanner, we use a tool called SonarCloud. Cool. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, there's a few I can't answer that I'm going to send to Matt to get answers for in the chat, but there's one more that just says, how far back do you support OS versions before they drop off the edge?
Ooh, that is a very good question.
If you don't know off the top of your head, it's okay. We can pop it in the chat.
So as Amace says, we go about as far back as the statistics actually suggest is viable. I think we try and get about 95% of the current user base. So if you're on the version that's not included in that majority, 95%, then we kind of say, look, we can't continue to support older devices forever, because that is not sustainable, and it's also a lot of effort to make sure that the latest technologies work on the older devices, especially if nobody, well, very few people are using it. But the nice thing about Android and iOS is if we set a minimum version, newer versions of the app just won't be sent to that user, so they can continue to use the app. And we also try and make sure when we're building new features that backwards compatibility is at the forefront of our decisions.
Cool. Thanks, Sam. Amazed, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so basically, yeah, to echo what Sam said, especially based on statistics on which versions are no longer tested. So if we see that the number of users on a specific OS version is dramatically reduced and is a very low number, then we kind of do risk-based testing and we say, okay, well, we'll ignore this version and then focus on the newest version of OS that's coming to the market, because there are going to be more people on the newer OS version rather than the older one. So it's all based on risk-based testing, that if the numbers are decreasing rapidly, then we ignore that OS version and then bring in a substitute OS version that's coming to the market.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Right, there's a couple of unanswered questions there, but I think in the interest of time, we'll move on and then keep it to the end, and we'll keep posting in the chat as well.
Cool. Yeah. So this is the most important stage. So the release stage. So we try and plan our releases. This doesn't necessarily coincide with our 2-week sprints that we talk about. This can be done at any point, but only if we're in a position where we're ready. Then we create the candidate, and that takes about an hour and a half. Then we test that release. So Amaze goes and spends a day with both platforms, making sure that everything works as intended, gathering what's new. That is important for the releases, and I'll cover why that is. Change request, so this is internal to Co-op. Then we actually get the approval. Then we submit to the stores. And then you'll notice a lot of our time is actually spent waiting for the app stores to approve. And then we do a rollout. And then that is a 7-day period where we continue to monitor. And then once that rollout has been completed, then we continue to monitor the app in its current state, as well as continue the development work. So, release planning. So I mentioned it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the sprint. It just has to be when we want to release, as well as making sure we're in a position to release. So if you remember, I was talking about that main branch. Whenever we want to create a release, we will create a release branch off of that main branch. So if the main branch isn't in a position where we can make changes, then if we can't create that release candidate without there being bits on the development that need addressing first, then we cannot release. As part of that, we also do in-app events on iOS. You might have seen them if you're an iOS user, but our releases kind of have an impact with in-app events. So we try and make sure that when we're doing a release, that we're not that we're collaborating with the product marketing team to make sure that we aren't interfering, or they're not interfering with our release. So again, we also talk about other factors. So in-app events is just one factor, but there can also be other things that delay our release. So for example, pre-sales. If there's a huge pre-sale announcement, the last thing you'd want us to do is to put an untested version of, well, untested isn't the correct word, but a new version of the app to, I don't know, let's say 10% of our users, only to discover in that moment that there is a game-changing issue with it. So we kind of tend to hold off so that it's so if there are any issues that have managed to slip through the cracks, that it causes the least amount of impact to the business. So I've also covered that last one, which is, are we in a position? Because sometimes we might need a crucial ticket or two that need to be completed and have passed its checks before we actually even consider doing a release. So once we're happy, as I said, we create this release branch or this release candidate, and that takes up to 1 to 2 hours. It's a bit like a nightly build, but as part of it, it does an additional step of taking those prepared builds and submitting them to the app stores. It's a time-consuming process, but we can like let it do it in the background whilst we work on other things. So once we've done that, we then fire a change request to the business. The nice thing about the apps is that there is no outage required whenever we're doing an update. It will simply start rolling out and replacing the most up-to-date version with our new version. And when we do a change request, we also say that it's going to take a week, and that is just the rollout period. So submitting to the app stores. When we're submitting, we have to provide information like the version number. What they do like is a what's new copy, and this helps the end user actually find out what's new. So in the case of wallet, we say, hey, there's a new shiny wallet tab. Your card tab's gone, but we've made a really great change. And the last bullet point there about rollout strategy, that is an Android only kind of deal. The reason being is that iOS is tied into a rollout strategy that covers the 7 weeks. And their only other option is that halfway through that, they can just say, okay, push that out to 100% of users. Whereas Android, we've got a little bit more control because that is all done manually. So, yeah. So once we gathered all those bits of information, we send the app off to approve. So unfortunately, this is probably the longest bit of the whole release process, which is actually waiting for that approval. So sometimes it can take a day, sometimes it can take a week. It just depends on like Google and Apple's workload. And unfortunately, just because we've submitted it does not necessarily mean that we can get it out, because reviewers have a somewhat turbulent opportunity to reject us for any given reason. One of the most common ones is that because we are blocking network traffic from outside of the UK, you need to actually be on a VPN that says you are in the UK for it to actually function. And as you know, Google and Apple are very much America-based companies. So the likelihood of their reviewers being American is quite high. And if they don't read the instructions, then the app doesn't work for them and they can reject us. And that is probably the biggest pain in our backsides, because then we've got to go through a whole appeal process and say, look, please, like, it does work, you just need to be on a VPN. But it is based on the reviewer. If they choose not to listen to the instructions we provide them, we can't really stop them. So sometimes it does feel like rolling a dice as to whether or not they'll approve us. Fortunately, though, since a couple of changes, they are more likely to approve us than reject us these days. But I would like to mention that it can still happen, and it has happened rarely these days. So once we've got approval, we start to roll out. So we start with a small percentage of users, and as the week goes along, as long as everything is ticking along nicely and our logs is telling us that everything is okay, we increase the rollout percentage each day. If there are concerns, we'll raise them, and if they are more alarming than we are happy with, we say, look, stop it. We stop the rollout. Anyone who has not downloaded the latest version won't be able to. Then we go back, review it, identify what the risk and danger is, and then we go back into the whole process of going, right, well, what's the problem? We put it through the whole technical discussions, then into the development process, and then we go back into the release. But that means we have to start again from scratch. However, most of the time we're quite happy. So the rollout usually covers about a week. That's when we feel it gets most comfortable. And also it's worth mentioning that we don't really start rollout until Tuesdays, just because we know Monday is a significant day for the customers, and it's also the one where we get the most traffic, and therefore probably the most damaging day to do a release if something were to go wrong. So that is the release process. Here's your opportunity to ask questions related to that. Are there any?
Not any that haven't been answered already, I don't think.
No? I'll give it a couple of minutes.
Like an army of question answerers going on in the in the chat, which is good. Cool.
Loving the engagement in the chat, and I'm sure there'll be more as we go on through and beyond. Maybe continue, Sam, and then as they kind of go on through, if there are any more questions, we'll capture those at the end.
Cool. So the last section is pretty much just a recap. So the technical discovery, we're making the assumption that when we start the technical discovery that we know exactly what the new feature looks like. Then we create an overarching ticket that says, we have an overarching ticket that says what the feature is that we're going to do, and then then we talk about that and how that's going to pan out, as well as get like rough estimations that we can that we can then solidify as we're learning more. We break that large ticket down into smaller, more manageable tickets. We refine those tickets, making sure that everyone understands. We then organize those based on our needs, and also it is worth mentioning, I don't know if I did before, we review each sprint. So if one sprint didn't go quite up to plan, we have the we spend a bit of time reviewing that and saying, right, that didn't go according to plan. What is it that we can do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? If that is that we reduce how many tickets we bring in per sprint, then we've got no other option but to do that. And then we start the development. So again, development. So this timeline kind of loosely represents it per ticket. So the ticket gets assigned. Developer spends the amount of time it takes to actually do the development, as well as adding that unit testing and development testing, making sure it works as we expect. We then do the pull request to review the code and make sure that it goes through all these rigorous tests before we even get it into anywhere near the code, like the main branch. once everyone's happy and all the checks are passed, then we do a nightly build. That then gets given to QA. QA then writes the tests, does their testing on it, does their regression to make sure nothing else has changed based on what the development work has been done. Then when they're happy and it passes all their checks, that goes to the product owner, who will then review it to make sure that it meets the ticket's requirements and their understanding, as well as giving it to design to make sure it is in keeping with their vision. Then we're doing the regression tests, and then we can, once everything is happy, we say that that ticket is done. If at any point, it doesn't go according to plan or something doesn't pass the tests, then we go right back to the start of the development and investigate why that's not the case, and then go through the process again. After that, let's say we've got all the tickets done, so all 126 of them. We decide whether or not we're able to release. So this is part of the planning. Is it going to be, when is the best opportunity to release? Is there anything missing from the release? If we're happy and we're in a position where we can create a release, we'll kick off a build. We will then spend a day testing both iOS and Android to make sure that those builds are stable and we're quite happy. Then we get a load of information together to then put public to the users as part of the release. Then we fire off a change request within the business. We get approval for that. Then once we're approved within the business, we then go to the app stores. They then spend however long they need to approve that. Sometimes they'll come back with changes that actually need to be addressed. And then we address those. We go back through the process. We go, right, what is it they're asking us to do? Create a ticket for that, put it into our workload, and then start the release process again. Once they're happy, we start a rollout, and we continue to monitor that over a 7-day period, making sure that everything is as we expect it to be. And if everything goes right, then the rollout completes after 7 days, and we monitor that release whilst we're continuing on with new feature work. And I think that is everything. So if there's any more questions that have not been answered by that, now is your time to do so. Otherwise, you can message me or someone else on the team if you're a bit shy.
Well done, Sam. There's just one unanswered question in the chat. Not release specific, but aside from the UK based, what network requirements does the app have for normal operation? And which port does it use, assuming it's just HTTPS?
That is an interesting question. I'm not sure I understand the question. All I know as far as if you're using the app on your mobile device is that it should work as long as you're in the UK or you have a VPN active saying that you are in the UK.
Oh, beans. I think that's everything. Unless I've missed anything, Amy.
No. Awesome sauce. That was a fantastic session. And I think just in celebration for your efforts and the detail and the insight that you kind of gave us today, Sam, that we should all give another rousing virtual applause. I think that's like There you go. Like it was awesome. I really enjoyed it, getting a window into your guys' world. Lovely to see so much support in the chat from people kind of across our department asking questions, and I'm sure you'll have more. And all of these lovely people are super approachable. We'll love to answer your questions, I'm sure. Not that I'm just kind of going, yeah, like, yeah, I'm saying you will. You're lovely people.
True.
So if you want to kind of put your hand up to say a bit of like who you are, what you do, then like drop it in the chat and say like you can ask me questions about this, or you can come to know me a little bit more about this. As far as these sessions go, this session has been recorded and it will be shared after. So if you've missed it or you could only make the first half, please do catch up. It's really valuable information and it's so awesome to have had you all here today. As is normal standard for our lovely showcases before we all leave today, I have a poll with 2 questions, simple questions for you to ask. Did you enjoy today's session and did you learn something new? I know what I'm going to answer to that. I really enjoyed today's session and I definitely learned a lot of new stuff that I didn't know before. So thank you so much for your time and investment to us all today, Sam, and the team. But that's all for now. But if you do have any more questions, do keep dropping them in the chat. The team will kind of answer them as they go or reach out to them directly. And until next time, everyone have a fantastic rest of your day. It's been great and I look forward to next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Goodbye.